Hey glitter friends! In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create my 3D Beachy little Christmas tumbler. So, let's get started. Let's start today with a prep and painted tumbler. I'm using Rustoleum Ultra Matte White and a 20-ounce skinny. My paint is dry. I'm going to apply Eileen's Tack-it over and over with a foam brush, making sure it's fully coated. I work in both directions to make sure I don't miss a spot, but I like to finish with long, diagonal, even strokes to prevent any type of thick glue streaks. So, the great thing about this glue is that it's fairly fast drying and will remain tacky until covered with glitter, for example. However, if you're impatient like me, a heat gun can be used to speed along the process. Just make sure to keep it a safe distance away from your tumbler and continuously moving, or your glue can start to bubble up. Next, I'm going to apply my glitter all over my tumbler. I'm using Royal Sonesta from Mr. NOLA'S glitter, which is a beautiful light gold. There's really no wrong or right way to apply your glitter over this specific type of glue. Just make sure it's fully covered and you have no bare spots. So once all of your glitter is applied and you're sure that you have a pretty good layer of coverage, you're going to start going around your tumbler and burnishing the glitter down into your adhesive layer. I just like to go up and down and work my way slowly around the cup. You can see that I prefer to do this without gloves. This to me gives me a better sense that everything is laying flat and smooth, and I don't really have to worry as much about rogue pieces of glitter sticking up after the fact that will definitely mess with the way the finish of your cup looks. I wasn't completely happy with the color I achieved with my first layer of glitter, so I'm going to repeat the last few steps and reapply more Tack-it and glitter just so I can get a deeper, fuller coverage of glitter. If you're happy with the way yours turned out, please feel free to skip down the road to the next epoxy section. Once I was happy with the level of glitter coverage I had achieved with this step, I took my cup out and put 2 coats of clear sealant on to prevent my glitter from drifting or moving when I apply epoxy. For this step, I always like to use Krylon Triple Thick Clear Spray Sealant. Once your sealant is dry, you're ready for your first layer of epoxy. Like always, I am using Glass Coat Epoxy from Mr. NOLA'S glitter. It is a regular set epoxy, which is important for the step we do right after we apply this. I particularly love this epoxy because I like to stir my epoxy very fast with a wooden stick, and I don't baby it. And the great thing about this epoxy is it has degassing agents, so you don't have to worry about the thousands of microbubbles that you create when you stir like that. After my base layer of epoxy was complete, I mixed up a smaller batch and added resin pigment to achieve this white look. The brand I'm using today is Castin Opaque Pigment Concentrate, whose link I've put in the video description below for you. I'm applying this mixture with a metal stir stick in thin sporadic strokes with no specific pattern in mind. The only thing I like to try to do is to keep them all going in the same direction. If you're familiar with the mica hatching method or have experience making like Milky Way designs, this is a very similar method to that. As the tumbler continues to spin, you're going to see that this mixture is going to start thinning and spreading out on its own. But because I want a very light and airy effect, I'm going to use my heat gun to thin it while it spins and use my finger as well. While we wait for our epoxy to cure, let's work on sizing our decals. I've already downloaded the file and will be using the SVG version in Cricut Design Space today. Go ahead and ungroup your images like I do so you can weld them together to avoid any mishaps when you go to cut. After that, you're going to layer them back together and regroup so you can easily adjust the size. For what we're doing today, your wording should be 4 inches tall and roughly 3.5 inches wide, and your Christmas tree should be about 6 inches tall for both to fit on your 20-ounce skinny tumbler. This file set can be found on my website under Digital Downloads. I've included the link in the video description below. Once you've cut, layered, and placed your decals, it's time for the reason you're probably all here. Let's create a 3D sea glass tree. Because I'm an instant gratification kind of girl, I picked these glass deco stones up from Hobby Lobby in the floral section. Aren't they pretty? However, I did manage to find a perfect dupe for you guys on Amazon, whose link once again can be found in this video's description below. On top of your glass pieces, for this step you will need a bottle of UV resin and a UV lamp. What you don't see in this video is the insurmountable amount of time I spent picking out my cornerstone piece for the top of this tree. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too pointy and that it had the perfect shape, since it really sets the tone for the rest of your 3D piece. Think of this as the first piece of a puzzle or a collage. You're going to build and fit all your sequential pieces off of this first one, so it's very important to have a good foundation to go off of. And while it's not realistic to think that you can get all of these pieces to fit together seamlessly, I did choose to use a mix between small and large pieces, so there would be enough of an overlap that you would not see gaps down to the vinyl. Because I'm only using my UV resin as a means to tack these pieces of glass in place, you don't have to worry about setting it with your UV lamp for too long. I'd say I do about 2 to 3 seconds per piece, if that. While it may feel and look very tedious to pick through all these pieces of glass to build this tree, I promise the pace significantly picks up after you finish your first couple of levels. I'd say all in all, I spent about an hour from the first piece laid till I was done with the glass part of my tree. So by now you've gotten the gist of how this works and how to fit your pieces together, so how about we speed things up? So while you watch me work at warp speed, I do want to take a moment to emphasize that while this is a craft product that has been tumbled to take the sharp edges off, you still are working with glass, so please be careful and use the right amount of caution. So because our template is square edged and our glass pieces clearly are not, I had to go back in with an X-Acto knife and clean up the little parts of our vinyl that you could still see left over. You'll see that in a couple of spots this takes me quite a while. Obviously I got a little UV resin happy when gluing some of these down. So if this happens to you as well, don't worry. It might just take a little extra to cut through because you're cutting through that UV resin. You don't have to worry about breaking any type of seal because you are going to go over all of this with epoxy in one of our next few steps. So after you've spent the past hour painstakingly gluing tiny pieces of glass to a tumbler, and let's be honest, probably cussing me under your breath for putting this idea in your head, adding the last few details onto both sides of your tumbler will seem like a walk in the park. You can see on this side, I chose to only use a couple of seashells because I decided I really didn't want to detract from all the hard work that had been put in on the other side of the tumbler. However, please feel free to add as many seashells as your little heart desires. So unbeknownst to my daughter, I managed to snag a very small handful of seashells from her ever-growing beach collection to use in this project. I knew I wouldn't need very many, and she's 4, so she won't miss them. Anyways, if this is not an option for you, these shells can be found basically in any craft store or pretty much anywhere online. For this step, I've mixed up my epoxy, and as you can see, I'm starting in one corner and I am applying it onto my 3D piece with a round-tipped Mylar brush. I'm always a proponent of super thin epoxy layers, but it is especially important when working with 3D pieces. You want to make sure your 3D elements are fully coated, but you never want to let the epoxy pool into the crevices. This creates unnecessary microbubbles and causes you to lose important details. Once I'm satisfied that I've gotten enough coverage over my 3D piece, you're going to see that I'm going to take my brush and I'm going to basically outline my tree with epoxy. I do this because to me it's just another fail-safe, so when I go to coat the rest of my tumbler with epoxy, I don't have to drag that thick layer as close up to my piece. Now that I'm done using my paintbrush to apply epoxy over my 3D details, it's back to a normal method of application. As you can see, I barely get near my 3D elements when applying this very thin level of epoxy. I want to make sure there's enough there to where it will self-level and not cause any issues, but again, I'm always very concerned about making sure there is not too much epoxy there to pool. After this layer of epoxy cures, I will do 2 more identical layers just like this. Same thin layers, same layers with a paintbrush. This way I can make sure my tumbler is fully protected as well as my 3D pieces are fully coated. And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us on our very first tutorial. If you'd like to see more, don't forget to hit subscribe so you'll be notified of our new videos dropping every Tuesday. See you next time. Bye!